She ironed a tablecloth. She bought balloons. She ordered his favorite meal. She rehearsed what she was going to say 100 times. She was 7 months pregnant, and she was so ready to give him the best night of their marriage. And that same night, she sat in the back of a hotel ballroom and watched her husband walk to a microphone beside a woman she had never seen before. A woman who was also pregnant. And she heard him say into 12 cameras and 200 people, "I would like to introduce my fiancé and the mother of my child." She did not scream. She did not collapse. She walked to the front of that room and she said 4 words that stopped everything. And what happened next, over the following 4 years, is the story I need you to hear. Because it does not end the way you think it does. Stay with me. 1-line lesson. This is a story about what happens when a woman stops surviving her life and starts building it. And what that kind of courage actually looks like. One ordinary decision at a time. If this story stayed with you, if any part of Olivia's journey felt familiar, or gave you something you needed to hear today, do something small right now. Leave a comment below. Tell me which moment hit hardest. Tell me what you are building. I read every single one. Hit the like button if this story was worth your hour. Share it with one person who needs to hear it today. And if you are new here, subscribe. Because every story on this channel is built exactly like this one. With intention, with honesty, with you in mind. The next story is already coming. You do not want to miss it.
Imagine sitting in the back of a beautiful hotel ballroom, 7 months pregnant, wearing the nicest dress that still fits over your belly. You came to surprise your husband at what you thought was a routine business announcement. You are so proud of him. You have always been proud of him. And then you watch him walk to the microphone beside a woman you have never seen before. A woman who is also visibly pregnant. And you hear his voice, the voice you fell asleep next to for 3 years. Say the following words into a room full of cameras and reporters and 200 people in expensive clothes. I would like to introduce Rebecca Harlow, my fiancée, and the mother of my child. We could not be more thrilled. Applause, champagne glasses raised, cameras flashing, and you sitting completely still in the 3rd row from the back, hands on your stomach, while the floor opens up beneath you. This is the story of Olivia Hartwell, and I am going to tell you right now, it gets significantly worse before it gets better. There are moments in this story that will make you want to put your fist through a wall. There are moments that will make you laugh despite yourself. And there is an ending that I think you are going to carry with you for a long time. But here is what I need you to know before we begin. Olivia Hartwell did not survive this story. She rebuilt it from the ground up with her own hands, one deliberate decision at a time. And what she built, what she became, was something no one, including herself, could have predicted standing in that hotel ballroom with the floor disappearing beneath her feet. Are you ready? Because her story starts the way most catastrophic stories start. Not with a disaster, with an ordinary Tuesday morning and 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Olivia Hartwell was 30 years old when her life began to quietly fall apart, and for the first several months, she did not know it. She was a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Portland, Oregon. The kind of woman who could look at a crumbling bridge and immediately identify which bolt had failed and why. Precise, analytical. The sort of person who kept a running list of things to do and experienced a measurable physical satisfaction from crossing items off it. She had been with Carter Whitfield for 6 years, married for 3. Carter was 42. Self-made in the way that certain men are self-made, which is to say he had started with some advantages and leveraged them brilliantly and then quietly edited the advantages out of the story he told about himself. He ran Whitfield Capital, a private equity firm he had grown from a two-person operation in a rented office above a dry cleaner into a $40 million portfolio over 15 years. He was sharp and charismatic and very good at reading rooms and people. He had a smile that made you feel like the most important person he had spoken to all week. Olivia had loved that smile for 6 years. She had no idea that for the past 14 months, that smile had been directed, quite frequently, at someone else entirely. She found out she was pregnant on a Monday, not a dramatic Monday. A very ordinary February Monday, with gray Pacific Northwest skies and a grocery list on the refrigerator that still had Carter's protein bars written in her handwriting. 2 pink lines appeared on the test, and she sat on the bathroom floor for 11 minutes. She watched the clock because she was the kind of person who noticed elapsed time. And then she stood up, washed her face, and started planning, because that was who Olivia was. She planned things. She bought balloons, blue and white, because she did not know the gender yet. She ordered Carter's favorite meal from the steakhouse on Morrison Street. She set the table with the good plates, the wedding gift ones they used approximately 4 times a year. She ironed a tablecloth. She actually ironed a tablecloth, which tells you something important about how much this moment meant to her and how carefully she had constructed the life she believed she was living. Carter came home at 9:15 that night. He smelled like airport and something else she could not immediately name, something warm and unfamiliar that she filed away without examining. He looked at the table. He looked at the balloons. He said, "I ate on the plane. Sorry, babe. Long day." And he walked upstairs to the shower. Olivia stood in the kitchen, next to the good plates and the ironed tablecloth and the steakhouse food going cold, and she felt the first small crack, not a break. Engineers know the difference between a crack and a break. A crack is something you monitor. A break is something you address immediately. She chose to monitor. She told him the next morning over breakfast, no balloons, no tablecloth, just coffee and the truth. Carter put down his mug. He said, "Are you sure?" Not, "Oh my God." Not, "This is incredible." Not, "I cannot believe this is happening. Are you sure?" She said yes, she was sure. He nodded slowly. He said they would figure it out. He said he had a big week ahead. He kissed her forehead, and he left. Over the next 4 months, Carter Whitfield conducted what can only be described as a masterclass in emotional withdrawal. He was never absent enough to confront directly, never cold enough to accuse outright. He was simply and consistently slightly less present every single week, the way daylight disappears in autumn. You do not notice it happening until one day it is dark at 4:30 in the afternoon and you cannot remember when that started. He worked late more consistently. He traveled more frequently. His phone was always nearby and always face down. He stopped asking about her prenatal appointments. He stopped touching her stomach the way he had in the first weeks after she told him. He stopped gradually and systematically being the person she had married. Olivia told herself she was being hormonal. She told herself pregnancy magnified everything emotionally. She told herself Carter was under enormous pressure with the Mercer Group acquisition and that stress was stress, and people processed it differently. She had a nursery to design and a baby shower to organize and a load-bearing wall analysis due at the firm by Thursday. She had a life to keep running. So she told herself what she needed to believe, and she kept moving forward. This is something important to understand about Olivia and about a lot of people in situations like hers. When we sense something is wrong but cannot prove it, we face a choice. investigate, or insulate. Insulating means building walls around the doubt to protect the life you have constructed. It feels like self-preservation. It feels rational and responsible and emotionally mature. But here's what Olivia, structural engineer, load-bearing wall specialist, would later understand with absolute clarity. Protecting a structure with a cracked foundation does not fix the foundation. It delays the collapse, and the longer you delay it, the more catastrophic it is when it finally comes. She was 7 months pregnant when the collapse arrived, and it arrived in the most public, most humiliating, most permanent way imaginable. It was a Tuesday in June. Olivia found the invitation on Carter's home desk while looking for a stamp. Thick cream paper, gold embossed lettering, the Mercer-Whitfield partnership announcement, the Harrington Grand Hotel. 6 p.m., formal attire. She thought, oh, this is the big deal he has been working on. He would probably love it if I came. She did not call ahead. She wanted to surprise him. She put on a navy wrap dress, the only formal thing that still fit over her 7-month stomach with any dignity. She called a car service. She did not think twice about going, because why would she? This was her husband's event. She was his wife. She was carrying his child. The Harrington Grand Ballroom was exactly as beautiful as its name suggested. 200 guests, crystal chandeliers, an open bar doing significant business. The kind of event where everyone is dressed like money and working hard to appear accustomed to it. Olivia sat in the 3rd row from the back, close enough to see clearly, far enough to slip out quietly if her feet started swelling, which they had been doing with increasing enthusiasm for the past 3 weeks. She checked her phone. She smiled at the woman sitting next to her, who asked when she was due. She felt, for the first time in months, something adjacent to contentment. She was here. She was supporting her husband. Things were going to be fine. Carter walked out at 6:15. He looked extraordinary. Charcoal suit, perfect posture, that smile working the room before he even reached the microphone. Olivia felt a rush of something she recognized as pride, which is perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of this entire evening. And beside him walked a woman Olivia had never seen before in her life. Tall, blonde hair, swept back, a green dress that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly car payment. 35, maybe, beautiful in a carefully constructed way, and visibly pregnant, not as far along as Olivia, but unmistakably, definitively, publicly pregnant. Carter reached the microphone. The room quieted. Thank you all for being here tonight. This evening is about more than business. Alongside our announcement of the partnership with Mercer Group, I want to share something deeply personal. I would like to introduce Rebecca Harlow, my fiancée, and the woman carrying my child. We could not be more thrilled, and we hope you will celebrate this new chapter with us. Applause. Immediate, enthusiastic, completely genuine applause. Champagne glasses raised, camera flashes from 12 directions simultaneously, reporters typing, people cheering. Olivia did not move for 45 seconds. She counted later, trying to reconstruct the moment with the part of her brain that always wanted to document and measure. 45 seconds of absolute stillness while a room full of people celebrated around her. Then she stood up. She moved through the crowd. She did not run. She was not hysterical. She walked forward with the measured steadiness of someone who has just received information that has not yet finished processing but whose body has decided to act anyway. A camera swung toward her face, and in front of 200 people and 12 rolling cameras, in a voice that came out low and completely steady, because Olivia Hartwell was constitutionally incapable of being anything other than composed in a crisis, she said, "Carter, what about our baby?" The room stopped, not quieted, stopped. The kind of absolute silence that descends when something happens that no one has a social script for. Carter's eyes found her across the room, and what she saw in them, what she would describe later to her sister, to her attorney, to herself at 3 in the morning for months afterward, was not guilt. It was not shock or grief or shame or any of the emotions a person might reasonably expect to see in someone who has just been confronted with the consequence of their actions in the most public possible setting. What she saw was inconvenience. She had inconvenienced him. Security reached her within 30 seconds. Two men in dark suits, professional and gentle, which somehow made it worse than if they had been rough about it. One of them offered her water. She said no thank you, because her mother had raised her to be polite, and apparently that programming ran deeper than catastrophic public betrayal. They guided her toward a side exit. Behind her, the room erupted in whispers. Outside, the evening air was cool. She sat on a stone bench near the valet stand, both hands pressed flat against her stomach. Her son, she did not know yet that he was a son, but he was, shifted inside her, a slow, rolling movement, a reminder. She looked down at her hands. She breathed. She said out loud to no one, to the parking lot and the evening, and whatever version of the universe was listening, okay, okay. And in that single word, repeated twice in the cold air outside the Harrington Grand Hotel, something began, not healing. It was far too early for healing, but something. The specific, quiet, almost imperceptible beginning of a woman deciding, at the cellular level, that she was not going to let this be the end of her story. Carter came home at 2 in the morning. Olivia was in the kitchen, fully dressed, a cup of decaf she was not drinking sitting in front of her, the good plates still in the cabinet where she had put them away an hour after coming home because she had needed something to do with her hands. Carter started with, "It is not what," she said. "Don't." He tried, "I can explain." She said, "I know you can. I don't want you to." She slid a piece of paper across the table. She had spent the 3 hours since coming home making a list, an actual, handwritten, itemized list. 2 columns. What I know, what I need. Because she was an engineer and lists were how she processed catastrophic failure, and the bridge of her marriage had just collapsed, and she needed to understand the structural damage before she could begin to assess what came next. Carter looked at the list for a long time. He said, quietly, "You're not going to scream at me?" She looked at him. "Carter, I design load-bearing structures for a living. I know exactly how much weight something can hold before it breaks. You broke this. The screaming doesn't change the structural damage. The list does." He moved out the next morning. Olivia's sister Lena arrived that same afternoon with a duffel bag, a box of donuts, and absolutely zero intention of leaving. Lena was 27, chronically underdressed for every occasion, and the owner of a small independent bookstore in Portland called Chapter and Verse that had approximately 400 deeply loyal customers and lost money 9 months out of 12. She knocked on the door, and when Olivia opened it, Lena held up the donut box and said, "I'm staying until further notice. Don't argue. I brought the maple glazed ones." Olivia said, "You can't just close the store." Lena said, "I put a sign on the door. It says, 'Closed for family emergency.' People respect that. What if someone needs a book?" Olivia, the internet exists. She stayed for 3 weeks. She was not good at practical things. She burned toast with impressive consistency. She reorganized the pantry by color instead of category, which helped no one navigate anything, and she had strong opinions about true crime podcasts that she shared at length and without invitation. But she was extraordinary at simply being present, at sitting on the couch at midnight when Olivia could not sleep, and not trying to fix anything, just existing in the same space. Proof that Olivia was not entirely alone in the world. Everyone needs Elena. If you have one, call her. She does not have to be a sister. She just has to be the person who shows up with donuts and stays. Margaret Cole was 61 years old, silver-haired, and the kind of attorney who inspired either deep relief or deep dread, depending entirely on which side of a case you were on. She wore reading glasses that she removed very slowly and deliberately before delivering information that required full attention, and Olivia quickly learned to treat the glasses removal as a warning system. Margaret's office had a framed quote above her desk. "Well-behaved women seldom make history." She had framed case results on every wall. She made coffee in a French press and did not offer it to clients during difficult conversations because she found that people thought more clearly when their hands were not occupied. Olivia sat across from her and slid a folder across the desk. Inside was every document she had gathered in the 72 hours since the hotel ballroom. Bank statements, travel receipts, a printed log of every evening Carter had come home after 9 p.m. in the previous 6 months. Every business trip cross-referenced with what he had told her versus what the credit card statement suggested. Margaret opened the folder. She looked up. "You already had all of this. I'm an engineer. I don't go into a structural assessment without data." Margaret closed the folder. She looked at Olivia over her glasses for a moment. Then she removed them, slowly. "Mrs. Whitfield, I think this is going to be a very interesting case." 3 weeks after Olivia filed for divorce, Carter's legal team filed a countermotion. Their argument: Olivia had willfully damaged Carter's professional reputation by appearing at a private business event without invitation and making a public scene. They were seeking to limit her settlement on grounds of emotional instability. As evidence, they submitted the hotel ballroom video, the same video in which Carter publicly announced his affair and his other pregnant fiancée, as proof of Olivia's erratic behavior. Margaret read the filing in her office while Olivia sat across from her. She removed her glasses, very slowly. "He's aggressive. I'll give him that. Can they actually do this? They can file it. Whether it holds is a different matter. But Olivia, I need to be direct with you. This is going to get harder before it gets easier. His team is very good and very expensive, and they are going to look for anything. One text message, one social media post, one moment of public anger they can frame as instability. You cannot give them that moment. Not one single moment." "I don't do public anger. I know. But you are 7 months pregnant. You have been publicly humiliated in front of cameras. Your marriage is ending, and they are calling you unstable. It would be entirely human to break." Olivia looked at her steadily. "Margaret, my entire professional specialty is holding structures together under conditions that should theoretically destroy them. I know how to hold a line when everything is shaking." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "Good. Then let's get to work." He arrived at 4:40 in the morning on a Thursday in August. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Furious about being born, which the nurse said was an excellent sign. He had a full head of light brown hair and hands so impossibly small that when he wrapped his fingers around Olivia's thumb for the first time, her entire body went quiet. Not numb, quiet. The specific, profound quiet of a moment so large it temporarily silences every other frequency. Everything that had been noise for the past 8 months. The legal filings, the ballroom video that had been viewed 11 million times on social media. Carter's face when she said, "What about our baby?" The countermotion, calling her unstable. the 3 a.m. crying she never let Lena hear, all of it went completely silent. Just this, just him. Lena was in the waiting room and cried so hard when she was allowed in that the attending nurse quietly offered her a wheelchair. Lena said, "I am fine. I am completely fine. He is so small. I am absolutely fine," and then sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, which nobody commented on because it seemed like the right call. Carter did not come to the hospital. He sent flowers. A large, expensive arrangement with a card that said "Congratulations," which was such a spectacular failure of language that Olivia almost laughed. She had the nurses put them in the hallway. She named him Noah James Hartwell, her maiden name, not his. She lay in the hospital bed, with Noah sleeping on her chest, and she made a decision that she did not articulate out loud because it did not need to be articulated. It was simply true, the way certain structural facts are true, the way a good foundation is true, undeniable and load-bearing. She would build something real, for him and for herself, and whatever that required, she would do it. Noah slept. His breathing was small and perfect, and completely unconcerned with anything happening outside the radius of his mother's arms, which struck Olivia as exactly the right attitude. She pressed her cheek to his hair. She breathed. Carter's legal document arrived the following afternoon, delivered by a courier who looked deeply uncomfortable with his assignment. The document outlined a financial settlement offer and a formal request to terminate parental rights in exchange for a lump sum payment. Olivia read it once. She folded it carefully. She placed it in the drawer of the hospital bedside table. She called Margaret from the hospital room while Noah slept in the bassinet beside her. Margaret answered on the second ring. Olivia said, "He sent a termination of parental rights document to the maternity ward." A pause. Margaret said, "To the hospital? Yes." "The day after your son was born." "Yesterday afternoon?" Another pause. Olivia could hear Margaret removing her glasses. "Olivia, I need you to keep that document exactly where it is and do not touch it again. It is now evidence, and I need you to understand something. He just made a very significant error." "Good," Olivia said, and she meant it with a calmness that surprised even her. She hung up. She looked at Noah. She said softly, to him, to the room, to whatever came next, "We're going to be okay, buddy. I know how to build things that hold." Noah made a small sound that could have been agreement or could have been gas. Either way, Olivia took it as a good sign. 6 months after Noah was born, Margaret Cole called with news that made her smile. Margaret Cole did not smile often, or without reason. "Carter's team wants to settle." The number on the table was significant. Not buy an island significant. Not never work again significant. But breathe without panic significant. The Portland house was hers, a structured financial settlement, child support locked in legal concrete. Carter's counter-motion regarding emotional instability had collapsed after Margaret submitted 47 documented pieces of evidence, recorded voicemails, travel receipts, the sworn testimony of 2 former Whitfield Capital employees who confirmed Carter had brought Rebecca Harlow to company functions while still married. The instability argument had crumbled under the weight of its own absurdity. Olivia signed the settlement papers on a Tuesday afternoon in Margaret's office. Margaret opened her desk drawer and produced a bottle of very good champagne. Olivia laughed, a real laugh, the first full one in 8 months. "You keep champagne in your desk?" "Only the good kind, for the good days." They toasted. Olivia drove home. She picked Noah up from Lena's apartment. She sat on the kitchen floor of the house that was now entirely, legally, unambiguously hers. with her 6-month-old son in her lap and the October light coming through the windows. She thought, maybe the worst is over. She sat there for a long time, just breathing, just being in the quiet of a Tuesday evening that belonged completely to her and Noah and no one else. And she allowed herself to feel it. The exhale. The first real exhale in months. This is important. When you have been in survival mode for a long time, the moments of genuine relief feel almost dangerous. Like you cannot trust them. Like allowing yourself to feel safe is somehow naive. Do not believe that. Let yourself have this good afternoons. Even when the story is not finished. Even when you know there is more road ahead. The good afternoons are not weakness. They are fuel. Olivia had approximately 8 months of good afternoons before the next hit landed. She went back to work when Noah was 4 months old. Her firm welcomed her back with a new project. A pedestrian overpass redesign for a city initiative, and she threw herself into it with the specific intensity of someone who has discovered that competence is its own form of healing. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job, but she was better now, in the way that people who have survived something real often become better at the things that matter to them. Noah grew. He learned to roll over. He learned to sit. He developed opinions about specific toys with a passion that seemed disproportionate to his size. At 5 months, he laughed for the first time, a surprised, delighted sound that Olivia immediately called Lena about, and that Lena listened to a recording of 4 times in a row. Life had a shape again. Not the shape it had before. A different shape, smaller in some ways, larger in others. Entirely her own. She thought, we are finding our footing. She was right. For about 8 more months. And then the article came out. 8 months after the settlement, a business journalist named Kyle Brennan published a 12,000-word profile of Carter Whitfield in Pacific Business Review. The title was The Rebuild: How Carter Whitfield Lost Everything and Found a Better Vision. Olivia found out about it from a colleague who forwarded it with the subject line 3 dots and a question mark, which was perhaps the most diplomatic possible way to alert someone that their ex-husband had just been profiled as a redemption story. She read it on her lunch break. The article described Carter as a man who had made difficult personal choices during a challenging period, who had emerged with clarity and renewed purpose. His relationship with Rebecca was described as unexpectedly transformative. His restructured firm was described as leaner, wiser, and more values-driven. Olivia appeared in the article as a former marriage that ended amid personal difficulties. 8 words, 6 years, personal difficulties. She put her phone down. She went back to her desk. She stared at the structural blueprints in front of her for approximately 4 minutes. Then she typed an email to Margaret with one line. Have you read the Pacific Business Review piece? Call me when you can. And here is something I want to say directly because it matters. Whoever speaks first, loudest, and most compellingly shapes the public narrative. Carter had a journalist and a publicist and a restructured company with a PR strategy. Olivia had her life and her son and her work and her integrity. For a while, that felt insufficient. But here's the truth about public narratives and the people who try to control them. A story told in 12,000 words can be undone by 12 years of living differently. The truth has a longer runway than any press cycle. The receipts always come due eventually. Hang on to that. 2 months after the article, Olivia was offered a senior engineering position at the firm. She had competed for it openly against 3 other candidates, and she had won it on the merits. Her name went on a new door. Her salary increased enough that she and Noah moved from the Portland house. Too many memories, Carter still present in the walls somehow, into a new apartment with high ceilings and a window above the kitchen sink that caught the morning light in a way that felt like a promise. She enrolled Noah in a good preschool. She started running again in the mornings before he woke up. She called Lena every Sunday. She even went on one date, a structural engineer from a competing firm named Daniel, who was kind and funny and said the word journey 4 times in 2 hours. She came home and called Lena 4 times. Lena said, "That's disqualifying. That's what I said." She was not ready for anything romantic, and she was at complete peace with that fact. She was building. She was moving. She was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely looking forward to what came next. And then Carter's attorney called Margaret. Carter wanted to revisit the custody arrangement. He wanted more time with Noah. He said in the legal filing that he had matured significantly and was prepared to be an active and present father. Olivia sat in Margaret's office and listened. She said, "He has never once shown up on his scheduled weekend." Margaret said, "I know." "He missed Noah's first birthday." "I know." "He sent a gift card." "I know. $25. Amazon. I have the documentation." "For a 14-month-old? Yes." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "And he's claiming my work schedule constitutes an unstable primary care environment." He used the word unstable again. "Yes." "Margaret, does he understand that I have documented every single missed visit, every canceled weekend, every unanswered call?" Margaret removed her glasses. He is about to understand it very thoroughly. And then, because sometimes life decides that one catastrophe is not a sufficient lesson and delivers several simultaneously, the next 60 days brought 3 separate disasters in rapid succession. The first, the Pacific Business Review article was picked up by a national business podcast with 2 million subscribers. The host described Carter's story as one of the most compelling founder comebacks of the year. Olivia appeared in the episode as his ex-wife. 2 words. The podcast comment section included multiple people praising Carter's growth journey. That word again. And several comments speculating about whether the ex had been difficult. Olivia read the comments once. She closed her laptop. She did not read them again, not because she was not hurt by them, but because she understood, structurally, that reading comments about yourself written by people who know nothing about you is the equivalent of asking a random stranger to perform a structural assessment on your house. Their opinion has no load-bearing function. It does not hold anything up. The second, Carter's custody filing was assigned to Judge Raymond Marsh, who had a documented preference for expanding paternal custody in cases where fathers demonstrated renewed commitment. Margaret flagged this the day she learned about the assignment. It was not good news, and she did not pretend it was. The third, the major infrastructure contract that Olivia's senior position had been partially built around. A project 8 months in the making, a significant municipal commission, was canceled due to budget cuts at the city level. Not her fault. Not anything she had done or failed to do, just the arbitrary cruelty of budget cycles and political decisions made by people who had no idea they were removing a structural element from someone's carefully rebuilt life. 3 hits, 60 days. She called Lena on a Friday night. Lena said, "How bad is it?" Olivia said, "On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd call it a committed 7. Not a 10? Not yet, but it's a very determined 7. Lena said, "I'm coming over. I'm bringing wine for me and those sparkling waters you like. We are going to watch something completely stupid on television for 2 hours and not discuss any of this. and then we are going to discuss all of it. That is exactly what I need. I know. I've been calibrated to your needs for 27 years. Here is your next piece of real advice from this story, and I mean it seriously. When multiple things collapse simultaneously, resist the urge to address all of them at once. Triage. What is urgent and time-sensitive? What can wait 48 hours? What do you actually have the power to influence right now? Olivia made a list. She always made a list. It was not a magical solution. Lists are not magical, but they are clarifying. And in the middle of a committed 7, clarity is the most valuable resource you have. The custody hearing was 6 weeks out when Margaret received a phone call that she described to Olivia as unexpected and potentially significant. It was from Rebecca Harlow's attorney. Rebecca, the woman in the green dress, Carter's fiancée, the other pregnant woman from the hotel ballroom, had quietly separated from Carter 4 months earlier. No announcement, no press release. A filing in Multnomah County that Margaret's assistant had caught during routine monitoring because Margaret Cole monitored everything routinely as a matter of professional principle. Rebecca's attorney was calling because Rebecca had information directly relevant to Olivia's custody proceedings. Specifically, she had documented 17 occasions in the previous 2 years where Carter had missed or canceled his scheduled time with his daughter with Rebecca, citing what Rebecca described in her own words as prioritizing optics over actual parenting. Rebecca was willing to provide a sworn statement. Margaret called Olivia that same afternoon. Olivia was quiet for a long moment after Margaret explained. Then she said, "Is she okay?" Margaret paused, a genuine pause, not a strategic one. That is an interesting question to ask right now. She has a daughter with him. She sat across a ballroom from me once without knowing I existed. I do not think she is the villain in this story. No, Margaret said. Neither do I. I want to stop the story here for a moment. Because this is important. Olivia Hartwell, who had every rational reason to view Rebecca Harlow as an enemy, chose to see her instead as a person who had also been failed by the same man, who had also believed in something that turned out to be constructed on a rotten foundation, who was also, in her own way, trying to figure out what came next. That choice, the choice to extend empathy to someone you have every social permission to resent, is not weakness. It is not naivety. It is a form of strength that very few people manage, and it is almost always the thing that separates the people who eventually find peace from the people who remain locked in the story of what was done to them. The size of your empathy determines the size of your eventual freedom. 3 weeks before the custody hearing, Margaret received a second piece of information, this one from a forensic financial analyst named Paul Garrett, a former federal investigator who charged significantly and was worth considerably more than he charged. Paul's report was 43 pages. The summary was 3 paragraphs. The relevant paragraph: during the divorce settlement process, 3 joint investment accounts had been systematically undervalued through a subsidiary restructure completed approximately 2 months before Olivia filed for divorce. The discrepancy totaled approximately $340,000 across the 3 accounts. The restructuring had been conducted in a way that was technically legal, but deliberately obscuring, and Paul had only found it by examining secondary filings that most forensic analysts would not have known to cross-reference. Carter had hidden money, not offshore account in the Caymans money, but enough that the original settlement had been built on incomplete information, enough that the settlement could be legally reopened. Margaret put the report on her desk. She removed her glasses, very slowly. Paul found what I suspected, but could not prove at settlement. Carter's team buried 3 accounts in a subsidiary restructure. We missed it. I want to be direct with you. That is on me. Olivia said, "What does this mean for the custody hearing?" "It means his custody filing just became significantly more complicated for him. It means we have documentation of a pattern of financial deception that speaks directly to his credibility as a witness in his own case. And it means—" She paused. "It means he is about to have a very bad month." Olivia sat back in her chair. She thought briefly, and without drama, about the ironed tablecloth, about the ballroom, about personal difficulties and growth journeys, and the podcast comments and the committed 7 of a Friday 3 weeks ago. She said, "Let's have a very bad month." The custody hearing lasted 2 days. Carter arrived on day 1 with a polished attorney and a prepared narrative. He had grown. He had reflected. He was committed to active fatherhood. He brought character witnesses, a therapist's letter, and a carefully constructed presentation of a man who had made mistakes and learned from them in the specific, photogenic way that looks credible in a courtroom. He was good. His attorney was better. They had clearly rehearsed. Olivia sat at the other table and watched and said nothing. On day 2, Margaret submitted the following materials to Judge Raymond Marsh. First, a documented record of every scheduled visit Carter had missed or canceled over 26 months, organized chronologically, with timestamps and cross-references to his social media activity during those same dates, which revealed that he had attended 3 industry events, 2 charity galas, and 1 vacation in Scottsdale. During periods when he had told his attorney he was unavailable due to work commitments. Second, Rebecca Harlow's sworn statement. 17 canceled visits with his daughter, a pattern of performative engagement, showing up for photographs and then departing. Carter's own text messages, subpoenaed with Rebecca's cooperation, including one that referred to his daughter's birthday party as optics management. Third, Paul Garrett's complete financial forensics report, all 43 pages with the $340,000 discrepancy clearly annotated. Fourth, a voicemail. Carter had left it on Olivia's cell phone 14 months earlier at 11:42 p.m. Margaret played it in the courtroom at moderate volume. The room was completely still. Carter's voice. "You made this harder than it needed to be, Olivia. I offered you a clean exit. You should have taken it." The recording ended. The room remained still for approximately 10 seconds. Judge Marsh looked at Carter's attorney. "Counsel, does your client have a response to the voicemail?" Carter's attorney. "Your Honor, that was said during a period of considerable personal—" Judge Marsh. "I'll take that as a no." The ruling came the following week. Primary custody remained with Olivia, with structured visitation for Carter. Scheduled, documented, with a compliance requirement and a review mechanism if visits were missed without documented emergency. The financial discrepancy was referred to a separate proceeding that Margaret described as almost certainly favorable. Olivia walked out of the courthouse on a Thursday afternoon in April. Lena was on the front steps. She had taken the day off from chapter and verse. She was wearing the wrong jacket for the weather, which was very Lena, and she had brought 2 cups of coffee from the place on 3rd Street that Olivia liked, which was entirely Lena. She held out her arms. Olivia walked into them. They stood there for a while on the courthouse steps while Portland pulled back and looked at her sister with hundred pulled back and looked at her sister with an expression that was both entirely serious and somehow also the most Lena thing she had ever done. Olivia, sometimes people defeat themselves. Your only job was to not get in the way. Olivia laughed, a real one. They drank their coffee on the courthouse steps. It was a good afternoon. She let herself have it completely. Here's what the next 18 months looked like for Olivia Hartwell, and I want to tell it honestly because the honest version is more useful than the polished one. She did not launch a company overnight. There was no single eureka moment set to an inspirational soundtrack. There were a lot of late evenings at her kitchen table after Noah was asleep, spreadsheets and projections and drafts that she revised and revised again. There were conversations with Margaret about liability structures, and conversations with Lena about risk tolerance, and conversations with herself. At 2 in the morning, about whether she was genuinely ready for this, or whether she was confusing ambition with impatience. She took her time. She had learned over the previous 4 years that taking time was not the same as standing still. Sometimes the most important structural work happens during what looks, from the outside, like nothing. Her partner in the venture was a colleague named Thomas Waverley. They had worked together at the firm for 3 years, and Olivia had come to trust him in the specific way you trust someone who is consistently honest, even when honesty is inconvenient. He was steady and straightforward and had a dry sense of humor that made 14-hour workdays survivable. He also had a genuine gift for client relationships, the ability to explain structural engineering decisions to people who did not understand structural engineering in a way that made them feel uninformed rather than patronized, which was a skill Olivia respected enormously and did not herself possess to the same degree. They called the firm Hartwell Waverley. Margaret reviewed their partnership agreement and said it was one of the tightest she had seen from a first venture. Thomas said, "That is because Olivia wrote the liability clause. She is constitutionally incapable of leaving a structural weakness unchecked." Olivia said, "That might be the nicest thing anyone has said about me professionally, Thomas. I also once told a client your load-bearing analysis on the Morrison overpass was genuinely visionary." Olivia, "That was second nicest." Their first major commission was a pedestrian bridge redesign for the city of Portland. The day the contract was signed, Olivia took Noah to see the existing bridge. He was 3.5 years old. He stood at the railing in a too-big raincoat that Lena had bought him without checking the size, holding Olivia's hand, and looked at the water below with the focused expression he wore when he was processing something important. He said, with complete authority, "Mama, this bridge needs work." She looked down at him. "Yeah, buddy, that's exactly why we're here." She put him up on her shoulders. He grabbed her hair too hard, as he always did, and she did not say anything about it. They stood there for a while, looking at the bridge that was about to become hers to rebuild. Lena came to the office opening. She cried, which surprised no one. She had worn the right jacket for once, which surprised everyone. Margaret came. She did not cry. But she brought the good champagne. A journalist from a small architecture publication came and wrote a piece about Hartwell Waverley's community-focused approach that was, in its modest way, the precise opposite of the Pacific Business Review profile. It was 700 words. It quoted Olivia on design philosophy. It mentioned Noah in one sentence, not as a detail of her personal story, but as someone who had recently declared that a specific bridge needed work, which the journalist found charming. Olivia framed it, not because it was a major publication, but because it was hers. The story she was building, told in her own words, on her own terms. She was 34 years old. She was just getting started. And here's the wisdom piece I want to offer before we get to the ending, because I think it is the most important thing in this entire story. Olivia did not rebuild her life because she was exceptional. She was not some rare category of human being with superhuman resilience and extraordinary luck. She was a woman who made a list at 2 in the morning when she had every reason to fall apart, who found Alina and kept her close, who hired a Margaret and trusted her completely, who chose repeatedly and deliberately to extend empathy even when resentment was available and arguably justified. She rebuilt because she made specific choices, consistently over time. That is available to anyone. The foundation is not a gift. It is a decision. He showed up on a Saturday morning in October, 4 years and 2 months after the hotel ballroom. Olivia was in the kitchen making Noah's breakfast. Scrambled eggs, slightly overdone, because Noah preferred them that way, for reasons he had been unable to articulate since he first developed the preference at age 2 and had not revised since. The Saturday morning light was coming through the kitchen window, that specific October light that comes in at an angle and turns everything it touches briefly golden. Noah was still asleep. He had a soccer game in the afternoon and had been awake the previous night, worrying about it with the focused intensity he brought to most things, which Olivia recognized as a trait that had come entirely from her side of things. The buzzer rang. She pressed the intercom. Carter's voice came through the speaker. "Olivia, it's Carter. I know this is unexpected. I just need a few minutes. Please." She stood at the counter. Outside the window, the city was doing its ordinary Saturday things. A bus. Someone on a bicycle. The bakery across the street, with its door propped open, and the smell of something good coming through. Everything completely normal. Everything completely unchanged. She pressed the button and buzzed him in. She did not rush to the door. She turned back to the stove and took the eggs off the heat. She got 2 mugs from the cabinet and poured coffee, and then thought about it and put 1 mug back. She left his side of the counter empty. He knocked. She opened the door. Carter Whitfield looked like what 4 years of consequences looks like on a person. Not destroyed, not broken, in the dramatic way a person might hope for, if they were the kind of person who hoped for that, but honestly different. The particular shine of a man who had never genuinely questioned himself had dulled into something more matte, more real. There were lines near his eyes that had not been there before. He held his hands in front of him in a way she had never seen from him, uncertain and careful, like someone who has learned that his hands have done damage and is no longer sure how to carry them. He said, "You look well." She said, "I am well." A pause. She waited. She had learned patience at significant cost, and it now cost her nothing. Carter exhaled slowly. "I made a catastrophic mistake. I know that is not new information. I know there is nothing I can say that rewrites what happened. But I needed you to hear it from me directly, not through attorneys, not through mutual contacts. From me. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. She felt no trembling, no sudden surge of old grief or old anger. Not because the grief had never been real. It had been real, devastatingly real, in ways she still sometimes encountered unexpectedly. In small moments she had not prepared for, but because she had done the work. Grief does not disappear if you work through it. It changes form. It becomes something you have metabolized rather than something that is still metabolizing you. She said, "Go on." He told her everything. The relationship with Rebecca had begun 14 months before Olivia's pregnancy. The Mercer acquisition had been partially structured around the Harlow family's investment network, which meant ending the marriage had been, among other things, a business decision. The partnership had unraveled spectacularly when Rebecca's father discovered Carter had misrepresented growth projections to secure the deal. The fallout had been swift and extensively documented in the business press. Though Olivia had received most of this information from Margaret over the previous 2 years and was not surprised by any of it, Rebecca had filed for divorce 12 months ago. The custody proceedings were ongoing and described by Carter with the specific grimness of someone who had recently experienced what it felt like to be on the other side of a well-documented legal case. He had spent the past year and a half in what he called a kind of free fall, the specific disorientation of a man who built everything on the wrong surface and then watched it all slide away. Olivia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set her mug down on the counter. "Why are you here, Carter?" Not a question. An invitation to be honest, possibly for the first time, without the performance and the calculation. He looked at her directly. "Because I want to know my son, and because the part of me that was buried under ego and bad decisions for a very long time—" "Don't finish that sentence." Quiet, but without cruelty. He stopped. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out for a moment. The October light was still doing its thing. The bakery was still open. The Saturday was still happening all around them, indifferent and ordinary and exactly right. She turned back. She looked at him with the full, composed steadiness of a woman who had built herself from rubble and knew precisely what she was worth, and what she was willing to offer, and what she was not. "Noah is 4 years old," she said. "He is funny and curious, and he asks more questions per hour than most adults ask in a week. He loves bridges and illustrated books about marine biology, and he has strong feelings about how his eggs are cooked. He has never once asked me where his father is, because I have made sure his life is full enough that the absence doesn't echo." She paused. "But he deserves the chance to know you. Not because of what you need, and not because of what you lost, and not because of what you regret, because he deserves a complete picture of where he comes from. That is about him, not you." Carter's jaw was tight. His eyes were wet. She continued, "If you want to pursue this, it goes through Margaret's office, formal and structured. Scheduled visits, documented, consistent, not performative, not optics. Consistent." She held his gaze. "One missed visit without a genuine emergency, and it stops. One moment where what you need takes precedence over what he needs, and it stops. One instance where I have reason to believe he is a detail in your story rather than the point of the relationship, and it stops permanently." She let that sit for a moment. "Are we clear?" He said, "Yes." "Good." She walked to the front door and held it open. He moved toward it, paused in the doorway. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not the practiced sincerity of the boardroom or the courtroom, but something unguarded and genuine that was probably as close to honest as he had been in a very long time. "What you have built," he said, "Hartwell Waverly, the work, everything, It's extraordinary, Olivia. She met his eyes. I know, she said. Not with arrogance, not with performance, with the clean, unshakable certainty of a woman who had done the work and knew exactly what it had produced. He left. She closed the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment, with one hand resting against the wall, and she breathed. Not a dramatic breath, just a breath. The ordinary, necessary, ongoing act of a person who is alive and continuing. Then she went back to the kitchen. She reheated the eggs, which had gotten cold during everything, and she made a plate, and she poured Noah's orange juice, and she set it all out with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned that ordinary mornings are among the most precious things there are. Noah came padding down the hallway in his socks. He was constitutionally opposed to wearing shoes inside the apartment, a battle Olivia had decided 3 months ago was not worth the energy. He climbed onto the kitchen stool and looked at his plate with the serious expression he wore when evaluating something important. He picked up his fork. He took a bite. He said, "Mama, are these overdone?" "A little." "Good." He took another bite. "That's how I like them." She sat across from him with her coffee. She watched him eat. He had Carter's jawline and her stubbornness and a completely independent personality that belonged to neither of them, that was entirely and only his own. He was going to be someone. She did not know who yet, neither did he, but she had the specific, structural certainty of someone who understands load-bearing foundations that whatever he built, whatever he became, it would hold, because she had built the foundation right. Outside, the October light was still coming through the kitchen window. The specific Saturday morning light she had chosen this apartment for, back when she was choosing everything only for herself and Noah and what they actually needed, not what she had been told she should want. She thought about bridges, about the ones that hold, not because nothing ever hits them, not because the weather is always good, or the load is always manageable, or the conditions are always favorable, but because the people who built them understood what they were doing and did not cut corners and did not build on surfaces that could not support the weight. She had built this, all of it. The apartment and the firm and the morning, and the boy eating his slightly overdone eggs without complaint, and the October light and the life that was entirely, finally, irreversibly hers. She had built it on the right surface, and it was holding. Olivia Hartwell did not get her life handed back to her. She built a new one, from a hotel ballroom where the floor opened up beneath her feet, from a legal document sent to a maternity ward, from a voicemail that called her son the Portland situation, from missed visits and podcast comments and committed sevens on a Friday night and 3 disasters in 60 days and the specific, unglamorous labor of showing up every single day and doing the next right thing. She built it with a list made at 2 in the morning, with a sister who showed up with donuts and stayed, with a lawyer who removed her glasses slowly when something important was coming, with a partner who said her structural analysis was visionary and meant it, with a son who had strong opinions about eggs. She built it with empathy she chose to extend even when resentment was available. She built it on a foundation of her own making. And if you are somewhere, right now, in your own version of the hotel ballroom, stunned, humiliated, hands on your stomach in the cold air outside, saying okay to a parking lot that isn't listening, I want you to hear this. You are not finished. You are not broken. You are not the 8 words someone else used to summarize you in an article written by someone who does not know you. The foundation is not gone. You are the foundation. Go build. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bring you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.